So we're upside down again. Nodes are in charge of the network, not miners. Nodes don't need to adjust stuff around in order to anticipate what it is miners might do and prevent the situation where miners becoming even worse. Mining is incredibly centralized for reasons highlighted in it's basically an artifact of Stratum v1. So even though you have decentralized hash rate, you don't have decentralized mining because you only really have a few nodes that have any impact over what goes in the blockchain. Now, acquiescence to this and defeatism around it ever being something we could actually improve means we're getting this ridiculous claim from the spam side saying nodes need to start getting rid of all their ability to decide what it is they want to filter and what it is they want to relay around the network. Because if they don't, some giant miner can get a leg up on other miners by offering some out-of-band service where they can accept transactions from people that aren't able to get it through the P2P layer. And nodes need to anticipate that and just be as permissive as possible and basically run as a free service that allows spammers to send nonsense, non-monetary transactions through everyone's nodes for free, use up block space, take part in a miner's side gig so that they can earn a tiny little bit more money and fill up the blockchain with trash, ultimately making life more expensive for the person that runs the node, because the reason they're running their node is so that they can actually do transactions themselves, and now those are going to get more expensive. And they're just completely operating against those incentives. And this has never been part of the discussion, ever. It's never been a thing or an assertion that we all need to have the same mempool and have no means to control what goes through it and reflect our participation in the network via the mempool policies we choose without there being some ugly trade-off. And it's awful because the arguments that are coming out of the spam side are all true, but they're all completely trivial and they're all manifest problems that are terrible for other reasons that we need to fix. Like, centralization of mining is a serious, awful issue, and all of the people on the anti-spam side, like me, basically make up Ocean. We were at the front of this battle, and we're the only ones taking centralization of mining seriously. We wrote a protocol that takes into account what miners are realistically going to do and say, all right, we're going to let you run your own node within that context because then we can decentralize mining while still having a pool and making it financially viable for you. Spam is neither here nor there. If we go aggressively anti-spam, you're still going to get, even if we mind empty blocks, you're still going to get 99% of what other pools get because it's all just subsidy at the moment anyway. The spam discussion is around the remaining 1%, which is transaction fees, and 1% of that 1%, which is what you might, the spam you might use instead of financial transactions instead. It's neither here nor there. The napkin math of it says, yeah, technically you're right. If there's a lucrative spam transaction and you don't include it in a block, yeah, you're going to make a bit less money. Is that going to manifest in you going out of business while someone else that includes a 90-byte op return in a transaction in a block doesn't? Absolutely not. The reason mining is centralized is because of the way mining works, but also because of the realities of FPPS. FPPS as a payout model means that being a small pool means you have to basically be a front for a big pool that can actually afford to keep FPPS going. Those are the reasons mining's centralized. No one cares, and instead it's, oh, if users have sovereignty over their mempools and don't want to participate for free in relaying trash around the network, they will suffer. So they are incentivized to help with this whole complete farce where we're trying to help miners out with their side gig and transition them from getting paid by Bitcoin, earning Bitcoin to protect Bitcoin, to get paid Bitcoin by people who are nothing to do with Bitcoin. That is not difficult to understand why that would undermine everything in the long term. Miners making money is not the point of Bitcoin. The source of the revenue matters. If miners are able to prove that they're green enough to qualify for subsidies from governments and tax breaks, that's a bad thing, okay? Because it means if you're not willing to play ball with governments and prove your compliance and operate at whatever scale is necessary to make that viable, then you have financial incentives to do things other than protect Bitcoin. That's a problem, right? And it's the same, it goes back to the same thing as why we don't want proof of work to be calculating prime numbers or folding proteins or any of that. You don't add external things like that that create more volatility. Don't do it. And moving goalposts is never a good thing. Bitcoin is basically predicated on the idea that for better or for worse, the variables are what they are and no one can trivially change them, because that just undermines everything if stuff can be trivially changed. This is why Ethereum's ultrasound money narrative was nonsense, because making it more deflationary than Bitcoin doesn't make it sound money. The fact that you were able to change it makes it less sound. It doesn't matter what you changed it to. So this was a very funny mischaracterization of the reality here. So all that is to say, mining centralization is a huge problem, and it's got nothing to do with spam filtration, even though technically they're correct. It's just them pointing out a twig in a giant forest and saying, see, there's some wood here. And we're saying, that's not what's relevant here. And the other one they always bring out is fee estimation, which is infuriating, because they're basically saying your fee estimators will break if you don't have the same core approved mempool as everyone else. This is so annoying, because they know that fee estimators that need to work that way are useless, and that's why it doesn't exist in Bitcoin Core. I don't know how to summarize that as being as stupid as it is, but they're just saying fee estimation, some types of fee estimation will break. They never even offer that much nuance. That type is something we would never do or recommend because it's stupid, but it will break if you have if you have aggressive spam filtration going on. So what? This is completely not a real argument, and it's just another one of these things they use, like, oh, not Luke is the only developer behind Knots, so you can't run that. Block propagation will slow down. Let's just pretend that if you're the only guy filtering something, you will have everything cached that ends up in the blocks from people that get what's more standardly allowed to relay around the network. You'll have everything cached, so the compact blocks as you receive it will be verified just as fast. Now, this is the scale of this rift and war going on in Bitcoin at the moment means that there's going to be disinformation all over the place now. And I'm sure there's plenty of people on my side that are proponents of users having control over their own mempools. I'm sure there's plenty of people just taking cheap shots and making inaccurate arguments, and I've made inaccurate arguments myself. I'm not trying to make this any more political than it needs to be, but necessarily there's going to be a bit of that anyway. I'm sorry, that's just humans and how people work in these kinds of scenarios. But I am looking at the arguments being made by the spam apologists, trying to frighten people into thinking that they cannot have sovereignty over their own mempools, otherwise bad things will happen. And I'm saying every one of these arguments can be put in a context where it's obvious that you guys don't really care about that. You just want there to be a homogeneous mempool because it's convenient for you and it serves a purpose that betrays an agenda to make Bitcoin way more conducive and friendly to spammers. That is the only reasonable conclusion to get from this, because otherwise, why are they making these terrible arguments? If I run a node and I have some spam filtration policy that no one else has, it doesn't slow down my block relay because everything gets cached. It doesn't mess up my fee estimation because I'm using Bitcoin Core or Bitcoin Knots, and that doesn't go off what's in the mempool, because we know that's not a sensible way to approach stuff. It might make a bit of difference, but it is not the be-all and end-all of the heuristics for fee estimation. What are the other ones they talk about? Mining centralization. Again, mempool policies, if they are violated by miners, is supposed to punish the miner, not everyone else on the network. This gets flipped on its head. I'll explain why that is. If we are all filtering out a kind of transaction, like 90 bytes of op return, let's say, and one miner includes it, the only way they got that is if they made the transactions themselves or if it was given to them out of band. That means there's no caching at all the node levels because of the filters. They literally just never saw it. If they never saw it and the miner puts it in a block, yes, that block does propagate around the network more slowly because it contains a transaction that was unfamiliar to all the nodes. So they need to request it in order to verify that the block is valid. What does that mean? It means in a decentralized mining environment that miner has a greater risk of their block getting orphaned. They are punished for doing it. They're not punished to the extent of violating the consensus as enforced by nodes, but they're still punished by violating mempool policy as enforced by nodes, because it's just slowing stuff down for them and increasing the chance that their block gets orphaned versus a miner that respects the mempool policies of nodes. That's the correct perspective to have here, and Core are doing the opposite. They're saying miners are so big and powerful that if they mine a block that contains stuff the network's never heard of, The fact that it takes the network longer to process it means competing miners are also going to be at a disadvantage when the race for the next block starts, because the big, giant miner doing out-of-band stuff gets to publish their block and start mining on top of it immediately while the rest of the network goes, hey, what's this? That is a terrible scenario. That does cause further centralization of mining, but it's only possible in an environment where mining is completely centralized anyway, which is due to far more fundamental problems, like as mentioned by unhosted Marcellus, the nature of Stratum v1 in the first place. Ocean is going to fix this stuff. Datum adoption is growing, Ocean is growing, people get it. Tether coming along and saying, this fits with Bitcoin, we're going to use this. That's an amazing thing, whatever your opinion of Tether is. The fact that they understand that is impressive to me, and they're completely right about it. I don't know when they're going to start throwing tens of exahash at Ocean, but they're going to move incredibly slowly given the size that they are, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. And that fixes it, and then you go back to the proper scenario where, hey, if I'm Mara and I have Slipstream and I'm charging people $80 or whatever to include 90 bytes of op return, my block's going to propagate really slowly around the network, so I need to charge loads of money to people for doing this. And those people go, we can either pay Mara a bunch of money to include our non-standard transaction that the nodes from this network all hate, or we could change our protocol, which is trivial for us to do because we're completely centralized, to actually fit within what the nodes actually accept and aren't actively telling us is garbage or that they don't want. NOT's nodes allow reasonable amounts of data storage. This is not an all or nothing thing. NOT says you can have 40 bytes of op return, because that's enough to store a hash, and a hash is enough to run an entire sidechain. You can do what you need to do with what NOTs allows. That was the original olive branch extended from the Bitcoin network to people that wanted to use it for stuff that was nothing to do with Bitcoin, just to store arbitrary data, hashes of arbitrary data. What we're doing now is we're resigning ourselves to the fact that mining is centralized to the point where these guys run the network, and we're saying, well, nodes need to acquiesce and bend themselves in knots to anticipate what these guys might do in order to not make it worse. And that's a complete... First off, you're resigning to negotiating with spammers that are going to keep asking for more and more and more. And second off, you're saying we can't fix centralization in mining. And if mining is centralized, it doesn't matter what they do with mempools and transaction inclusion. These guys can just mine empty blocks. Foundry can 51% attack if they want. They don't need 51% to do the attack. They need 51% for it to be a perpetual success. They can still disrupt now if they want. And the fact that you think they won't do that comes down to trust. We're away from all the assumptions that come from proof of work, decentralization. We don't have that in mining. And we're not going to get it by nodes ruining their own sovereignty by trying to anticipate what miners might do. The whole thing is pathetic inversion of what it is, of the power structure in Bitcoin. The nodes run it. Like I said, nodes enforce blocks fit consensus rules. They also somewhat more gently enforce that what it is they're indicating they'd like to be in blocks, more strictly than consensus, is also respected. And in normal, healthy conditions, miners have every reason to do that. Back in 2016, there was a pull request adding a new mempool policy or tightening a mempool policy. And all it said in the pull request, which got into Bitcoin Core, was, hey, miners, you're going to want to respect this, otherwise your blocks have a higher chance of getting orphaned. Why? Because nodes control this stuff, not the miners. It's up to miners to anticipate what nodes want. And Cora out here saying, nodes need to anticipate what miners want, because mining is completely centralized, and it gets slightly worse if you guys start asserting you have any control over your mempool. This is upside down, and it's, as I say, it's resignation to Bitcoin mining being centralized in perpetuity. And the concern around mining centralization cannot be taken as sincere from the spam apologist side, because I've never seen any of them do anything but mock and belittle what Ocean has done, writing a whole protocol that does what Stratum v2 is still not able to do. So this is very annoying, and it betrays a complete disingenuousness and elitist, holier-than-thou attitude that has been betrayed in this changing narrative. So we've had 2 years of filters don't work, and now we've finally gotten to the point where they're saying, all right, We admit it, they work, and that's why we want to get rid of one. But you're going to want to go along with this because of all of these second order effects that happen when you run these things. Sorry, this is not the block size war. The B cachers don't get to sit on the other side and say, we already have 20 megabyte blocks. It doesn't do any harm. No, they wanted to change something. They wanted to increase a variable by an order of magnitude, and then they would hand wave all concerns around centralization by saying, oh, hard drive space is getting cheaper and internet connections are getting faster. No, this is the opposite of that. Now Core are the ones saying we need to rip stuff out that's been working since Satoshi was around because it's going to create a bunch of problems, and those problems do not manifestly exist at the moment. They do, but none of them as a result of spam filtration. That's the point. Fee estimation sucks because it's basically impossible. You never know what a miner is going to include in the next block, and you never know how long it's going to take. It doesn't matter if you have the same mempool as everyone else. That's not going to fix that. And as I said, fee estimation in Bitcoin Core uses way more sophisticated heuristics than that. It analyzes everything that comes through its mempool, and it looks at how long it takes to get into blocks and what fees it's paid, and it makes a long-term estimation based on that. It doesn't say, here's the mempool, and everyone else has the identical mempool to me, therefore, this is how much space there is, I need to pay this fee to get in. That doesn't work, okay? I admit that that fee estimation approach breaks if you have aggressive filters because you don't know what the mempool is, but it's not a realistic approach to estimating fees because the next block might come along and it might just be Mara with a bunch of slipstream stuff. You have no way of knowing if they're going to do that. Also, the next block might be an hour from now because that's just what variance does. And then even if you paid the right fee to get in versus everyone else in the mempool, it's still not going to work because since you did that transaction, a whole bunch more people came in and went ahead of you. That's why RBF exists. That's why fee estimation is basically an art. And people saying L2s are very sensitive to being able to get into the next block in an expedient fashion. We need to put down all our defenses as nodes and completely operate as benevolent free relay services between spammers and miners. Otherwise, these things aren't going to work right. They can't work right anyway. Not until Bitcoin ends up being some sort of deterministic system where there is a block every 10 minutes no matter what happens. And that's not Bitcoin. It's not going to work like that. It's random, and random means there is no fee estimation assumption you can make where you say, I'm definitely getting in the next block. You could pay $1 million in transaction fees, and unless you're the one that mines the block and puts it in, and then mines on top of that block and confirms it, you still never have finality. Someone can always reorg the chain, someone can always outbid you, someone can always mine an empty block. These things can just happen. Someone can sit on Foundry and say, you're not allowed to include that transaction. It doesn't matter how much they paid. They can do OFAC compliance, they can do anything like that. There is no solid assumptions you can make about this stuff. So it really annoys me because I'm on the outside of the Bitcoin intelligentsia, and they've fought wars before where they've been in the right. They've been saying to these big blockers, your arguments are not valid. We can't just make blocks giant and expect there to be no consequences for that. It will just centralize nodes, which means miners just do what a tiny group of people say, which makes the blockchain worthless. It all just unravels from there. It's so easy to see why that is a non-starter. But what we're saying is, let us carry on controlling what's in our mempools and stop trying to shoehorn in this bullshit agenda that says, unless everyone has roughly identical mempools, Bitcoin's screwed. Small miners won't be able to get going because they won't be able to find out about these super lucrative out-of-band now transactions. This is a nonsense narrative. Nothing about Bitcoin has ever relied on the assumption that all of the nodes have to have the same or similar mempools. That is not how this has ever worked. That is a new claim, and the scare tactics that are being used to justify people going along with this destruction of users having any sort of configurability about what they relay around the network is artificial, and it's not sincere. It's the same as the UTXO bloat thing. The inscriptions filter worked. It's in knots. Peter Todd keeps saying there's no technical means to filter inscriptions. Yes, there is. It exists. Is it 100% perfect? Obviously not. But if you run it, it works, and a percentage of the network already does run it. So but the lack of action from Core, having any sort of impetus to update the spam filters to counter what started happening in 2023 caused the UTXO set to bloat from 4 gigabyte to 12 gigabyte, to go from 80 million UTXOs to 200 million UTXOs. And now Citria come along, and they have some edge case with their Ethereum on Bitcoin thing, where a couple of times a year they'll end up putting something in a fake pub key instead of an op return because the filter on op return is preventing them from doing that. And they're all saying, oh no, the UTXO set is going to get bloated by what Citria is doing. We better nuke the op return filter for something like a kilobyte of data a year. It's a complete nothing from people that have paid no attention to another 8 gigabytes getting added to it over the last 2 years. This is a joke. This is being made by people that are doing politics, that are not arguing in good faith whatsoever. They do not care about UTXO set bloat. That is being used as a rationalization for getting rid of a filter in service of making everyone have homogeneous mempools. And that's just a cheap, short-term approach to fixing centralization in mining. It's not going to mess up fee estimation because that is not how good fee estimators work. It's not going to mess up block propagation. It's not going to further mining centralization. So what other arguments do they have? And I'm not glossing over anything here. These are the best arguments they absolutely have. You're going to make small pools die because big pools are going to mine transactions they don't know about. So they're going to lose the race. They're going to have to verify blocks that contain transactions they don't know about. Again, only true in a scenario where you have a couple of giant entities doing all of the mining. We need to fix that, and it has nothing to do with spam filtration. And if we do fix it, then the spam filters start working in the node's benefit and the small miner's benefit, because the smaller the miner, the more likely they are to adhere to what it is the nodes want, because they can't bully the network into being forced into verifying a block that contains a bunch of stuff that's more that takes longer for them. I hope that all makes sense, because I'm not trying to be like a torrent of information here, but there is just so many aspects to this. There's hundreds of little edge cases where people have to go, ooh, but what about that? What about that? Forget it all if you really can't be bothered to start digging into the nuances of what I'm talking about here. The reality is you've run mempool filters, and it's always been the case that we've said to people running nodes, you get to control what you relay around the network. That's configurable. It's up to you. And then you get this horrible argument, well, if you filter out a massive op return, it might still end up in a block anyway, so it was useless. How many times do I have to make the point that if it's activity I don't want to see, that I have no incentive to facilitate, I want the option of saying no. Bad things happen every day, and despite the clown show that it was last week at the conference, everyone agreed that arbitrary data in Bitcoin is not actually a good thing. Almost everyone. I think Shinobi disagreed, but Peter Todd did say if there was actually a way that I respect for minimizing arbitrary data insertion into Bitcoin on a technical level that was possible, I would be in favor of it. He did say that. So the general thing amongst the spam apologetic side is we can't do anything to counter it, so we might as well just let it happen. And there are some second order effects and trade-offs for if we do try and counter it. And again, I'm saying if you don't care about all the nuance from this, just know that we already do counter it, and those side effects don't exist. So there's been some other crappy arguments too, a lot of credentialism, like, Core know what they're doing, a bunch of podcasters don't, and they're talking about Preston Peace, who started running knots yesterday, and it's just more scare tactics, and it's very annoying because obviously when we had a problem with what Core were doing, they're like, look, dude, we are not your slaves. This is open source. If you don't like what we're doing, go run something else. And we're like, okay. And then when we do start running something else, they go insane and tell us we're all complete morons and that we have no idea what we're doing, and that Knots is only maintained by one guy, so we must be crazy. And then when we say, well, no, it isn't, it's 99% code from Bitcoin Core, and it's not appropriate for us to say Luke wrote all this when you did. And then I don't know, you can't win with these people at that point, because they're like, oh, you're being misrepresentative. Knots is just maintained by Luke. And he says, no, it isn't. You guys wrote most of the code for this. And like, if he flipped it the other way around and Luke went, I wrote all this, Knots is entirely my creation, they would say, how dare you rip off the work of all the core developers? 99% of what's in Knots is written by us, and you're pretending you wrote it all. So this is politics, guys. You can't win. But I think it's the high road here is saying Core wrote most of this, and it enjoys the benefit of having all these developers work on it. I think that's absolutely fair enough. That's the correct perspective, and people don't want to do that. They want to just say Luke is the only guy that wrote it because it makes it look less reliable. But knots has been a thing forever. Knots was the dominant tool used by Bitcoin miners way back. And there are hundreds of thousands of blocks mined by Knots nodes rather than Core nodes because that was the only way to do it back in, I think, 2013, 2014. Core didn't really allow any of this kind of stuff. Knots did. And it's basically the same again now. We tell miners if you want to run Datum, you basically have to run Knots. You can do it with Core, but it's basically pointless because the whole impetus inside Core is to give everyone identical mempools, which makes it irrelevant. It largely invalidates the whole dream of decentralizing mining anyway. It just means Core might as well tell us what is contained in every block. It's not quite that bad, but it pulls us in that direction. So another mask off moment was when I was saying at the debate, I don't love the fact that a bunch of people are moving away from Core. I would rather Core remain a trusted, trusted with their position inside Bitcoin, and it doesn't give me much pleasure that we're about to experience all this disruption from everyone moving away from it. And rather than anyone appreciate that and try and work with us and say, well, let's try and, let's lower the temperature, I guess, on this whole debate and come to something that isn't as contentious, or just abandon it and reintroduce it in a better capacity. There are things they can do, right? This one argument they have for relaxing op return limits is it would be better if Citria used op return instead of bloating the UTXO set, even though, as I said, it's a complete joke in comparison to what's happened to the UTXO set by virtue of their inaction over the other types of spam. We could still address that alleged concern by saying, all right, we'll give you 150 bytes of op return, and after that, you're never going to use it anyway because the inscription hack gets cheaper at that point. That would be maybe defensible, but instead they're like, nope, we're nuking the op return and we're not even allowing it to be user configurable anymore. And then they've backed down from that one. That was Peter Todd's initial PR, and moved over to, all right, we're nuking the op return limit by default. We're allowing it to remain user configurable, but it's going to be deprecated. And we know that that is on the way out. So they're basically pointing that way. They've lined all the ducks up to go, users won't be able to configure this anymore, but that's going to be a later release. It has to be nipped in the bud. You can't move this way. Users get to have sovereignty over their own mempools. You can tell them it's useless and laugh at them as being virtue signalers on non-mining nodes all you want. That was actually my point. When I said to them at the panel, I don't like seeing people move away from Core, I don't like seeing Core embarrass themselves, they said, none of the people that have moved over are mining nodes. We couldn't care less. That's exactly what Craig Wright said when we were talking about the importance of being able to run a node. Craig Wright said, piss off with your node unless it costs at least $10,000 in hardware. We don't want you. And this is just supreme arrogance and indicative of people that just don't care about centralization. They might pretend centralization is a bad thing, and they use that to justify things they want to do to push the network in the direction they want. But the reality is they don't actually care. Ocean actually cares about decentralizing mining. That's why we made Datum, and it works. And we did everything. It wasn't ideological. It was all practical. It still uses Stratum v1 because that's what miners actually have, right? We have 116 Datum blocks in the chain now. This is not Stratum v2 that is going to carry on being on GitHub forever and is just completely unscalable. So you can run an exahash of miners on a Raspberry Pi 3 if you have Datum on the Raspberry Pi 3. You probably won't be able to sync the Bitcoin node because of all the spam, but assuming you could, like just copy over the chain from somewhere else and run it on something as bad as a Raspberry Pi 3, install Datum on that thing, and you can have an exahash of miners go through it, and it won't even break a sweat. However, if you run Stratum v2 on that, I don't think you could run more than 10 or 11 miners. It just isn't built the same way. On paper, it looks the same, but in reality, you just can't use the kinds of tools they're using to build the protocol. You needed someone like Jason to come in there and write it super lightweight. So they said they're not mining nodes. We couldn't care less. They're all virtue signal nodes. So basically, they're doing the Craig Wright argument, which is no one needs to run a node except miners. Those are the only nodes that matters. And they're kind of right if you want to, again, if you want to accept that Bitcoin is completely centralized around a small group of nodes that are underlying the big mining pools. But that needs to be fixed because Bitcoin is completely vulnerable and centralized in that state. So we need to move to a state where the rest of the nodes actually become relatively much more important. The more people mine, the more nodes there are responsible for that. And I don't mean mining to a pool where the pool runs the node. I mean the more people that mine and make their own block templates, the less important their collective power gets because they distribute it more and more widely, and versus the nodes that aren't even miners at all. They all become much closer in importance. You can't have a situation where you have a Ripple-style super node run by a foundry that gets to create blocks the network is completely uninterested in because it's consensus valid, but the network containing transactions that the network hated. You can't have that. You can't have that giant mega pool with its giant super powerful node say, I'm putting in a bunch of junk you guys don't like. And as a result, you're going to spend the next 5 minutes going, what is any of this stuff? And being way behind in the race for the next block. And I'll be able to mine it in, probably half an hour because I'm that powerful. And that advantage is going to compound, and more people are going to point their hash rate towards me, and I'm going to be a more and more influential entity in this whole ecosystem. That's just crypto again. That's totally centralized, and Bitcoin is basically in that state. It's just hopefully there's enough of us that care about it to actually have a real fix, rather than play politics with the problem and say, well, mining's so centralized and it's not getting any better that nodes are only making it worse by having control over their own mempools. We need to get rid of the standardness policies that allow a product like Mara's Slipstream to exist so as to undermine it. And then Mara will magically break up into 100 different entities and we'll decentralize mining that way. Do you see the fallacy here? Do you see how unserious they are about invoking concerns around centralization? They don't really care about it. They're just using it as a gotcha for people that actually think they are allowed to decide what they relay around the network. And that argument I didn't finish before as well, which infuriates me. A bad thing will happen, so you better give up trying to prevent it. Because 100 bad things happen every day, it might as well be 1,000. You have no business trying to prevent it. And actually, you'll suffer if you do try and prevent it. I'm made sick by that. That is not... If I see something bad going on, I can either try and put a stop to it, or I can just resign myself to the fact that, why does it have to be me to do it? I'm appalled by that. That is a totally immoral... I've said it on Twitter already, and a lot of you might already see that stuff, but I don't know if you do, so it bears repeating here. If I see something immoral and nasty going on, I don't just ignore it and actually facilitate it from happening. No, I don't do that. And actually, miners don't do that. Everyone likes to pretend there's just this isolated economic incentives are all that matters all the time. Then why did Mara stop mining OFAC-compliant blocks? I'm sure that was a thing that their lawyers said would save them a lot of money, complying with government censorship lists. Outcry from the community. Stock price falls. All right, that is a financial incentive, but marketing matters. And morals matter. People make decisions every day that lose them money because they don't want to be, engaging in immoral stuff. And if you go up to them and say, hey, what are you doing? Bad things are still going to happen even if you try and do the right thing. That person needs a slap in the face. Go away. Like there are a million bad things that happen every day. I don't want to facilitate them, and I don't want to be gaslit and told that if I stop facilitating them, a bunch of bullshit will actually start happening and that I'm going to suffer, so I might as well just bend over. I'm so sick of this, man. This is just not how humans work in any other context. You want to talk about human incentives being the magic that makes Bitcoin hold itself together. Well, where's my incentive? As a node runner, why am I relaying JPEGs to miners to facilitate their side gig, help them earn more money at my expense because I now have to compete for block space with this stupid use case that's nothing to do with Bitcoin as money? And you're telling me if I don't participate in this, that my fee estimation is going to suck, when it already sucks for a billion other reasons. And you're going to tell me block propagation is going to slow down. No, that's not going to happen either, because I'm going to cache the garbage so that I can reconstruct the block at the same speed as anyone else that relayed it. You're telling me mining's going to be centralized. Mining is already centralized, and placating that fact is how we get stuck in that situation forever. You actually need to be serious about the fact that mining's centralized, not just use it as a political football. Oh, so we can't run anything other than knots. We pretended you could. When Gloria went on What Bitcoin Did, McCormack's saying, what do you say to people that think Bitcoin's centralized because Bitcoin Core is what everyone runs? She's like, well, don't worry about that. It's FOSS, right? So if we ever do anything bad, everyone can just leave. Yeah, technically that's true, but look at what happens when people do. They get relentlessly mocked and beaten into submission. Yesterday was really a mask-off moment because Preston Pish, he suddenly says, I'm running knots, right? And he's got 500,000 followers. So that really brought out some crabs in a bucket. They were furious about it. Like, you're an idiot. You're a podcaster. Shinobi says, no offense, Preston, but you're a fucking moron. Like, I can't believe the bile and just nastiness of that. So you're telling people they're just complete. On the one hand, you're saying, hey, open source is safe because anyone can review it. And we're all... that's where the trust comes from, right? Even if you can't review it, so many other people can. Well, guess what? A lot of people that know exactly what they're talking about are telling you what Core is doing is completely unacceptable. And people are using their informed judgment to say, I don't want to run this anymore. I don't want to participate in it. And rather than listen to that feedback, it gets met with, A, let's mute the conversation and stop anyone from complaining about this. B, mocking anyone that disagrees with it, calling them idiots and telling them they don't know what a signed integer is. C, telling them they're using the wrong venue. D, inventing a bunch of technical mumbo-jumbo that's supposed to be like, oh, Core know exactly what they're doing, when they're not. They're just invoking tiny technical edge cases that are technically true but are completely irrelevant in the wider context of the issues Bitcoin actually faces. And E, now I see Gloria come on today and it's all sympathy now. It's not mockery. It's not fake Bible verses, thou shalt not store arbitrary data in Bitcoin. It's not mockery of people that take Bitcoin seriously anymore. It's, oh man, it's so sad that people don't appreciate all the work we do that goes into this. And just, how about engaging honestly for 5 minutes? How about that? Just saying, you know what? This is an unpopular PR, and we are trying to justify it with reasons that do not hold up. It is not justified to act like users should not have any control over what goes on in their mempools because it's all useless anyway and it will just end up in a block, and the trade-offs for it aren't acceptable. This is all completely mischaracterized. It's blowing potential problems out of the water, which again, we have on our side precedent that filters don't mess stuff up. They are the ones looking to nuke filters. Initially, it was just, we're not going to fix them because spammers have found a way around them. Now it's, we're going to get rid of them in anticipation of a new kind of spam. We are the ones saying, leave it alone here. And being the conservative, I mean, it really does come down to conservatism versus liberalism. And I don't know what to say about that because that just seems to be two strongly different kinds of people. And now we have all that to that effect. I wake up yesterday and everyone's calling me a Nazi, including Jeremy Rubin, who is a Core developer. So this is, again, is your campaign manager Hillary Clinton? Is that what the goal is now? We're going to rescue Core by telling everyone that the people that run knots are Nazis. It's a great joke because in American accent, they say knots and Nazi, so it does kind of sound similar. In English, it doesn't quite work because I say knots and Nazi, so it doesn't really work the same way, but fair enough. Have fun, guys. There's plenty of people on my side taking cheap shots at Core as well and making memes out of them and mockery of them. Great. It's tribal and horrible now. That's politics. That was inevitable anyway. But I still am just flabbergasted by the lack of honesty on the other side. Why are they inventing all these nonsense reasons that are so easy to debunk about fee estimation and block propagation and mining centralization and all that stuff? It's obviously nonsense, guys. And no one has been listening to me for the last 2 years on this stuff. I don't say no one. There's been a small interested section of Bitcoin that has been paying attention to what Luke has been talking about and me trying to sort of expand on it and explain it more approachably. But it's blown up now. People are getting it. And when Stefan said to me, Stefan Lavara was like, oh, but 99% of Core developers agree filters are bad or something. And he posted this nonsense by Antoine. I'm like, I'm sorry, no one is falling for this bullshit anymore. It is bullshit. Fee estimation argument is nonsense. Block propagation is nonsense. No one's falling for this anymore. So you guys need to just come clean with the agenda, okay? We know you want there to be a homogeneous mempool. We know it makes your life easier. Core have been pushing in that direction for ages, and I'm sorry, someone has said quite beautifully, even if there were these nasty trade-offs for me having control over what I relay around the network, it might still be worth it. And that's true. And the reality is it doesn't anyway. So this is not the block size wars. We're not advocating for something that actually can't be hand-waved, which is the kind of centralization of nodes you'd get with giant blocks. We're advocating for decentralization of the mempool into 100,000 different mempools, and something that generally miners are going to fit within. And Luke made the beautiful point that people calling it censorship are completely wrong. Bitcoin is censorship resistant because even if you can find 99% of the miners on the network and bully them into not including a transaction, all it takes is one block made by the exception for the censorship not to work. Spam is the other way around. All you need is for one block to be found by a miner with spam filters for them to have worked. They are the opposite in concept. Spam filtration is something that the more of it that happens, the better. Censorship is something that needs to be complete, otherwise it's genuinely useless. So the whole community, again, is upside down on that. If there's a couple of blocks a day found by someone that only allows 40 bytes of op return instead of 80, that's better. And I'm happy and I'll take that. And I'm not buying any of the trade-offs that apparently manifest as a result of me having control over mempools. So there's just a brief update. I think if I don't like, it's obviously very uncomfortable having all these, the Bitcoin intelligentsia constantly tell me I'm stupid and that everyone else that shares my position is stupid. I don't like it. I would like to reconcile that and have an actual proper conversation about it. And I would like Core just not to do this. So goals, what are we trying to do here with this movement we got happening? If Core just abandoned the PR, that would be great. If Core came back to the table and said, all right, let's make op return a little bit bigger, I think it's too little too late. They should have done that ages ago, but the hostility they've established by what they're doing is kind of backed them into a corner. They now have to nuke op return completely and keep telling everyone they're idiots for ever having a problem with that. Nuke the op return limit completely. Or they have to just abandon it, and then they set a precedent that anyone that can create drama on social media can prevent Bitcoin Core from making what they think are sensible technical changes. It's lose-lose at this point. Everything has failed, and it seems to me to be a manifestation of the fact that chain code is in somewhat disarray, that the kids have kind of taken over, the teacher's not in the classroom, because everything that's been done about this, the way people have been interacted with, the rudeness and the condescension and the censorship of discussion and the just constant equivocation, the invoking of bad arguments in favor of what they're trying to do, the immaturity at the panel last week, where every time Luke opens his mouth, they all start giggling like kids. The whole thing just is embarrassing. It doesn't warrant any respect, and I don't see a way out of this without some mature self-reflection and some ownership of the fact that Core are doing something they should not be doing, without any sort of apparent regard paid to the fact that there's a VC-funded shitcoin initiative trying to adjust Bitcoin in a way that works for it, that you guys are just trying to force through upon nodes that don't want this, in service of this whole bastardization of Bitcoin's power dynamic, where the nodes are supposed to be in charge. You just keep telling us miners can put it in blocks anyway, like they're somehow the boss of this network. They're just not. And every time people act, that's how they acted during SegWit. That was what my problem was with Core during SegWit. They were like, if miners don't give us this soft fork, then we don't get the soft fork. And we said, that's not acceptable to us. We want it. And if the miners don't give it to us, that's their problem. And we made it their problem by telling them their blocks will be consensus invalid if they don't signal to activate it. So we won because the miners realized the nodes are going to start rejecting our blocks if we don't do what they want. So we better start doing what they want. Happy Bitcoin. Bitcoin with the correct power dynamic. Wonderful. That's what we all want to see. And right now, nodes are going to one day, at a greater scale than today, figure out I don't want to relay JPEGs around the network. All it does is hurt me. If miners don't want to respect that, then that's their problem. They can have their blocks propagate more slowly around the network. And unless they are 50% of the network or something humongous, that's their problem, not my problem. If they are 50% of the network, yeah, all right, their block propagating more slowly actually makes the problem worse, not better. But if we ever reach that point, Bitcoin's dead. So I don't care. If the situation where we have to placate spam in order to placate miners that want to include it becomes so bad that it becomes a cascading problem that we have to just bend over for as Core are advocating, then it's lost anyway. It's over. We are almost at that point, but we have to push back at it. And in a world where mining is, template construction is decentralized to the hasher level, and they become full miners again, and the pool doesn't do any of that kind of stuff anymore, like make templates and run nodes. Once that becomes of course they run nodes, but the point is miners on Ocean using Datum get to make their own blocks and broadcast them to the network themselves. All of those miners are incentivized to do what the nodes want. Foundry less so, Antpool less so, but everything about Foundry and Antpool is bad for Bitcoin. You don't design Bitcoin around the fact that that will be a continuing issue. You fix that issue, okay? That is how we have to go about this. So I really hope that all makes sense. Keep going, everyone. We're doing really well. I'm so encouraged by the amount of nodes there are. NOTs nodes spiking up on the network. That's been a great thing to see. I did see someone from Chaincode say, it's all Amazon Web Server. Again, we are the high integrity side on this. Luke's site that tracks the different node implementations on the network deliberately excludes Amazon Web Server because he's that much ideologically committed to decentralization. And I'm going to celebrate Luke intensely here. He considers any nodes, no matter how many of them run via Amazon Web Server, as one node because Amazon effectively controls that node. So the fact that we are prepared to present things that way and not to distort the actual split of implementations on the network with things like Amazon is a testament to the fact that we're not trying to create false narratives and misrepresent stuff. As far as I can tell, and I was really expecting this last week for someone to say, those aren't real, those NOTs nodes are all just spun up on Amazon Web Server. Not a thing, guys. We are 0.8% of the network. We do not have that kind of money. Spinning up 500, 600 NOTs nodes on an Amazon Web Server, that's obviously, it's an expensive thing to do, and we don't expect anyone to buy that, and I'm not interested in blowing smoke up people's asses. That is not, I don't want to misrepresent stuff here. And Luke's site deliberately excludes stats like that anyway, but it lags by a month. So no one's using Luke's site, which only says there's like 5 or 6% of the network on NOTs. The sites that just look at listening nodes, which are more gameable, but they're not run by us, say we're at about 8.5% NOTs now. This war started when? 2 weeks ago? So 2 weeks ago, we were at like 2%. We were at 2% of the network. Now we're at 8.5%. We'll be at 9% probably at some point this week. And that's, I didn't see anyone at the panel or the debate at the conference say, oh, those aren't real. The best they had was they're not mining nodes, so we don't care, which is ridiculously arrogant. And I can't believe they said that. It's literally Craig Wright. But at least they didn't say they were fake. And then Chaincode Labs guy comes out saying, oh, these are fake, and someone's going to get a big Amazon Web Server bill. It's so annoying, dude, because this is real. People are actually annoyed with Core over this, and Core they've done everything, whatever it is, the 10 stages of denial, condescension, just everything about it has been so pathetic to watch. And I don't know where to go from here. I don't, but we'll come up with some plans. I do think we should make another anti-spam pull request into Bitcoin Core, and we can invoke the fact that they are seemingly very concerned about UTXO bloat at the moment, so maybe we can present it. But if it gets locked down as being controversial again, then it just becomes an admission of the fact that the moderation policies inside the Bitcoin Core GitHub are selectively enforced. Anyone can create controversy. If you're prepared to say, we will shut this down if it's controversial, but only do it, in select cases, then that moderation policy just doesn't work, does it? Because I can always manufacture controversy. I can even do it for mundane changes. The reality is, when they're being more honest, they say, look, there was no technical basis for anyone rejecting this change. And I admit that relaxing relaxing the op return filters, I mean, no, I don't admit anything. Actually, I take it back. There is obvious difference to setting the default policy for op return sizes bigger on Bitcoin Core. You're just going to get more op returns, more large op returns inside blocks going forward. All that does is crowd out the financial use case, make it more expensive for people to transact. Those are the people running nodes who are now being asked to relay this stuff and to store it forever. Pruning op returns isn't quite as trivial as people make out. Obviously, it's more trivial than pruning fake pub keys. But once you get past the incredibly shallow, on its surface rationalization for relaxing op return to mitigate fake pub key use, everything else about this is totally unjustified. And the manner in which Core have gone about it is just not acceptable. And people are standing up to it, all sorts of people, and calling them podcasters or morons or, non-developers, whatever you want. Those are the Bitcoiners, right? If you want to just have a currency, if you want to have a community that's just developers that think they know better than everyone else, think they understand economics better than everyone else because they know C++. I mean, I guess I'll finish with that point, actually. Bitcoin is everything to people that are into Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not everything to people that are expert computer scientists, because if Bitcoin dies, they have another option. They just go and work somewhere else. Bitcoin is just more of a fun thing, more of a toy, potentially. I don't want you to be that harsh. I'm sure some people working on Bitcoin Core, or the majority of them, do have a reasonable understanding of what Bitcoin is to our species and are very optimistic about what it provides as an opportunity for us. Fair enough, but that's not a given. You can just work on Bitcoin Core because you're ambitious, you're really good at writing C++, but that can also just mean, like Samson said, that you're fresh out of college, you have no real world experience, and you don't understand the realities of making this thing work the way it needs to work and not fail, and the human stuff, the human components of it all. And just saying, well, we know best because we're the developers, it's not a good idea, man. There's a reason people are pushing back, and if you just say you guys aren't technical, you have no reason to push back, and we have no reason to listen to you. That's not going to work, guys. So, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the update, and let's see how this thing keeps going. Run knots, mine yourself, enjoy your mempool.